Perlini is a poet and a storyteller and just published their first poetry and short story collection called Wild Has Roots. So welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to read my presentation because my form of storytelling is very labyrinthian, and I don't think you actually we don't have the time and space for that, for that kind of flow today. So, poems as tarot. This is not an academic presentation. So when I began my PhD a few years ago, I discovered the Osho Zen tarot deck. This visually voluptuous deck was very different to many mainstream decks. It was rich with often irreverent Zen insights. And I found myself coming to this daily ritual of tarot inquiry. It was a powerful tool for unearthing my own mysteries and fears and secrets. And although tarot has often been framed as a prophetic sort of fortune-telling device, my own relationship with tarot has been less about wanting to find out what's going to happen in the future. Not possible, really. Rather, I have used them as meditations for befores and nows and tools for excavation and questioning, and in that, future possibilities. Around the same time as my tarot inquiry, I began to delve into my love life with greater curiosity. My mind had been feeling so colonized by theories and references and methodologies that I felt silenced all over again. And intuitively, my body and heart sought love. And the only words which found their way onto paper during that time were love poems. Romantic love was certainly a significant part of it, but I was discovering my capacity for love in its many forms. Tragedy and celebration, the sun, the moon, the soil and her beings, jazz, bodies of water, ancestral murmurings and hauntings, dreams and dreaming. The questions and the curiosity around all of these loves and connections and connectors found their way into my poetry. Sadly, my mother's tongue, which I call it my mother's tongue, Tamil, is no longer how I communicate. And I mourn this. It has been eradicated. But I remember that storytelling is also my mother tongue, and poetry is my dialect. Poetry and tarot had become soul sanctuaries and an embodied resistance to my increasingly cerebral world. The entanglement between poetry and tarot is really not new. Poets have been using imagery of tarot as inspiration and prompts for the creation of poetry. And so while poetry and tarot both hold the potential to uncover, in Audre Lorde's words, deeply buried secrets, I have not come across poems framed as tarot. So in 2019, I collated my love poems into a very slim deck of tarot cards and offered readings to friends, family members, and strangers. The poems had not been written for this purpose, and I certainly was no Osho. They had been printed starkly on cardboard, no colorful images, and no offbeat Zen insights. Just word images from somewhere deep inside. Maybe, I thought, just maybe others could pose their questions to these love poems, and maybe, just maybe, something within them would come to light. As someone who had written poetry in secret, not fully believing that my work was worthy of being shared, I was also dipping a toe, a small toe, into public terrain. This way of sharing, while still a huge leap of faith, also restricted my audience to just one person at a time. I felt deeply vulnerable because I was revealing a very sacred part of myself to another through my own sacred language. I was revealing my deepest longings, fears, joys, and ways of loving to the public. Secretly, however, I was hoping that my audience of willing readers, some of you who are here today, would infuse my poems with a life force greater than the words on the page. And slowly my self-consciousness dissipated as the focus had changed. I was asking the reader to read my poems through the lens of their own lives, through embodied one-on-one readings. It required the reader's question, their life experience, their trust and their vulnerability. I was discovering a more connected and expansive self. And thus I began to reflect on possibilities for this experimental process to bring light to hidden sources of our power. Lord's words again, which according to her is ancient, dark, and deep. I suggest that poetry as tarot could bring light to alternative ways of knowing, uncovering some of our powerful secrets stifled by oppressive systems and mechanisms of conditioning. So how do we access the magic of our being, the innumerable possibilities of our unfolding, the power when this beingness has been systematically and systemically been undermined and buried? How do we learn to trust our intuition and the longings of our psyche when knowledge of the book and knowledge of the expert stand guard at the helm of knowingness? How do we tap into powers which are ancient, dark, and deep, and those powers have been and continue to be negated, dismissed, and persistently ridiculed? For many of us, intuition, embodied knowing, and the ability to tap into a world which is bigger than our concretized and limited selves can feel inaccessible. The limited self often feels separate from the other, from nature, from the ancestors, from the cosmos, from past selves and future selves, and from the greater mystery, and from love. The limited self must constantly look outward for approval and knowledge. The limited self is steeped in narrow identities. The limited self is a self that has been foisted upon us by historical and ongoing systems of oppression. But what of this lens of love? Love has been mentioned over and over in the last couple of days because it is potent. It is, I believe, a state of our full being. Love took me out of my head. The deep pain of breakups, deaths, losses of human and more than human loved ones. Joy when I've recognized and discovered kin. These were portals to my buried and silent self. Love, not the flowery, performative, and commodified thing of media representation, but that which wrenches us from our comfort zones and rational thought. This love can liberate, heal, and give us clues to our own hidden powers, akin to what Audre Lorde refers to as the erotic, a power which rises from our deepest and non-rational knowledge. A power she believes that women, and for most more marginalized people, have come to distrust within themselves. It is an ability to tap into our own sovereign source of power, which is disruptive and a threat to those who wish to keep us firmly in our place. If we can access the juiciness of love in its purest iteration within ourselves, the need for external approval and expertise becomes less important. Beyond thought, beyond the shoulds, beyond the citations. Through poetry, these can become invocations of gods and truths. Often in a tarot reading, a word or sentence often pops up like bits of stardust as it catches the light. A sparkle of an epiphany which may have been lying dormant under myriad external chatterings. This little deck of cards does not contain answers or solutions. Neither do I. Yet so many women, Black like me, whose sense of wholeness has battled on the periphery, they brought questions about dreams and visions to the cards. They too were offering a vulnerable part of themselves to the process and offered me a glimpse into their souls, into their greater selves. Some, mostly men, were skeptical, but skepticism too offers us clues. What if I'd picked another card, asks a friend of mine, raising his eyebrows. Then I respond, hopefully you will have unlocked something else about yourself. What I have come to understand is that the magic is in the intentional collisions and relating of various elements. The emotion and the blank page, the poem and the poet and the reader and the question and the poem. They are all players in the alchemic process of becoming. Now, sometimes I read my poems for myself, or the poems for myself. Their meanings have changed now, no longer mine at all. I need the layers of shared lives to ground me when I experience twinges of the limited self. Uncertainty surrounds me. I have found myself parentless, orphaned at 55. I have just said goodbye to a home that I've lived in for 20 years. I live in a province deeply and incessantly wounded by natural and man-made disasters. And daily there's news of death and tragedy in my close circles. My mental and physical health have absorbed the stresses around me. But I know I am not alone in the pain. I'm also not alone in the joy. My research has become more human and embodied, and I've made space for the unknown and the unknowing. I cite lived experience. I theorize in ways which honor the silences and knowledges of my ancestors by recognizing how it resides in my own body. I find poetry in the interviews and the contexts and conversations around those interviews. The cards remind me that there's more beneath and beyond the silences and erasure. If I listen closely enough, something will be revealed. And on good days, maybe something can be transformed. I'll just end with a found poem, which kind of maybe describes this process. It's called Demagia. Mystery, mesmos, Demagia. It is a rhythm more than our identities. I should have come directly to you. Lying in the leaves of grass by the small rivers on the margins, a woman who appears in unknown days, each time wearing my best underwear. Thank you.